everybody. Welcome to the Standing Committee on Health and Social Development. Today is Wednesday, February 26, 2020, and we're excited about to have two presenters today. Just to let you know, introduce the committee members. Corey Deagle's here representing Jamie Fox. Thank you for coming. Brad Trivers.
I just represent myself. But.
Oh, yeah. Just replacing, sorry. That's a good point. Hannah Bell and Trish Altes is here, and Heath McDonald will be along shortly. If the agenda looks good, can we get a motion to adopt? Trish Altes, thank you very much. And today's a special day. I'm just going to pass it. We have the Minister of Education here. I'm just going to let him say a word about why today's special.
Well, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Gord. I know this is an area that you're passionate about. I dare say that all MLAs, regardless of political stripe, passionate about. It's Pink Shirt Day today, which of course is Anti-Bullying Day. Yeah. And it was started a number of years ago, and when some students wore a pink shirt in support of their fellow student who was being bullied. And it's just a great way for students to show support against anti-bullying. And I know that all of the teachers and staff across the schools on PEI really take it very seriously. And I like to think we're making some good strides here on Prince Edward Island. I don't mean like now under this administration, but just over the last 10, 20 years really on stopping bullying in schools. I was out at Gulf Shore Consolidated today. They happened to be doing their science fair there, and both my children, of course, were doing science fair projects, but also wore my pink shirt, and a large number of students were participating, and it was great to see. So thanks, Gord, for the opportunity to talk about that.
No problem. Thank you, Minister, and it's we all join you in trying to prevent bullying. So we'll move along. Thanks a lot. We're going to get a briefing from Don Allen, Executive Director of Downtown Charlottetown Inc., regarding the work of the Navigator Street Outreach Program. So we'll probably save questions to the end. Again, she's going to read, and just take your time and just speak and enjoy talking about the good work that you're going to do. So we'll pass it over to you, Don.
Thank you, Gordon. I appreciate you inviting me here today. It's not very often that I get invited. It's usually that I'm attending something with an ask, but here I am. And it's a project that we are pretty proud of at Downtown Charlottetown, as are the downtown merchants and citizens, and I'm sure that you're all aware of it as well. So I thought what I'd do is just have a casual conversation with you to outline what the project is and what our vision is for it. And I would invite you to interrupt me at any point or ask questions if you would like. So I'll start because maybe not everyone knows what Downtown Charlottetown Inc. is either. So Downtown Charlottetown Inc. is a non-profit organization with a mandate to work with the business center to create and maintain a vibrant downtown through an established business improvement area. Working with property owners and businesses, DCI focuses on projects that will improve living and commerce in the downtown and rejuvenate the city core to an exciting place to live, work, play, and invest, the center of business, government, culture, and entertainment. We're funded privately by a levy that's collected through commercial property tax by property owners in the downtown, and that is 18 cents on every $100 that are collected within our boundaries, which are between Prince and Pownell Street and Euston to the water. The Navigator program, which I've come to speak to you about today, in a description, we would suggest that the Navigator Street Outreach provides homeless and street-involved individuals with support to address barriers to secure and maintain employment, housing support to navigate services around mental health and addiction support, and partner with a variety of community agencies to ensure individuals receive the supports required for their transition. So about the Navigator program, a little history. It's an interesting beginning, actually, and although we all know that there have been characters on the streets of Charlottetown over many years, and there's always been a half a dozen, and we would always know them by their first name, panhandling was not really a big issue in Charlottetown until 2014. And that is the year that we celebrated the 150th anniversary of the 1864 conference. It was a year-long celebration, and we invited the world to come and party with us, and they did. And we had a record number of visitors that year. Our own office throughout the year was receiving many phone calls from U.S. businesses that would say, can we set up street booths to sell T-shirts? And there were food trucks that wanted to come in. And with that, there came a whole new raft of what we would call our transient panhandlers. And those are the folks that come in as a small group with their backpacks and their dogs, and sometimes they stay under the bridge and they panhandle in our streets through the summer. Sometimes they busk. And for the most part, what they do is make enough money to backpack through Europe through the winter, and then they're gone, and then it's usually just our own people on the street. But what happened that particular year was that the transient panhandler situation almost doubled, and it was a really lucrative summer. There was so much going on and so many visitors. And what we saw happen was when our regular street folk were kind of making friends with these transient folks, and when the transient folks left, our regular folk took up the street corners where they were, after having a clear understanding that this was a profitable situation for them. So it was obvious at that point to DCI board and our members within the BIA that there was a panhandling issue in the downtown that was quickly getting out of control. Panhandlers occupied almost every corner and nook on Queen Street, Kent Street, and Water Street, and many other prominent corners within the BIA. They waited outside every church service, theater production, and public event. They set up shop outside the banks and coffee shops. They knew the cruise ship schedule and took full advantage of the visitors that came downtown. Attractions and real estate that were invested in, like the Sir John A. statue, Eckhart, and other features, were being used as prime locations for panhandling. DCI took on the task at that point to create a clean, safe downtown committee, something that other BIAs around the nation already had in place. The issue of panhandling and such street activities was priority to our group, which included the city deputy mayor, deputy chief of police, representative from the Chamber of Commerce, and the Salvation Army captain. We set out a plan which included asking the city to tweak bylaws, one, to give police some teeth when there were people who required moving, but in that we needed a captive audience bylaw and an aggressive panhandler bylaw. And for those situations, it was very obvious that that was needed. We wanted to make some change, but our intent was to both help those people who are on the street, but also to help commerce. Make no mistake, panhandling is an interference with commerce and tourism, and without tax dollars from these businesses, we don't have the resources that we need to fulfill the needs for our clients on the street. But, and I want to say this clearly, panhandlers are also people from our community, and their needs deserve attention. So the next step, DCI purchased and installed 6 caring meters to collect donations that went directly to food and shelter. And these were the needs that were stated on the panhandlers' signs. And you see these green meters in the downtown. The meters collections go 100% to the Salvation Army in the upper room, split 50-50. And to date, we've collected just over $12,000 in those meters. The last item on our plan was to hire a street navigator. Everyone had an opinion on who was on the street, why they were there, and we promised going into this that we would take an inventory of who was on the street, what their needs were, and how we could connect with them to get them the service that they needed. Literally down to sitting beside these folks, having the conversation and saying, who's your father? Where are you from? What do you need? How can we fulfill that need for you? In August of 2006, with funding assistance from Skill PEI, we hired our first street navigator at minimum wage for 20 hours a week through Skills PEI. DCI topped her up to 25 hours a week and her wage to 15. She had a master's degree in education and experience working in group homes and a passion for the product. We bought her a phone to use, so each of our navigators have business cards that they pass out to literally everyone on the street so they can contact the navigator whenever they need, when they have access to phones. She had her expenses covered for people on the street to purchase government health IDs, taxis, food, work boots, clothing, interview clothes, even topping up rents or buying groceries. This was our learning curve year. In August, the Navigator left us to take a full-time position with Housing First. The full-time position and the regular salary was important, and she left with our blessing. The program was then shelved until the following year. In 2018, we received a $10,000 of a $15,000 grant that we requested from the city in their budget. The fund was not to be used for salary. In the ask, we provided information, for example, on how the city of Halifax provides $45,000 annually without an ask to their BIA to support their Navigator program. In June, we hired our second Navigator with salary support for 5 months, full-time, from Skills PEI at $17 an hour. In December, the province, in recognition of this important service, provided us with a van, gifted us with a van, which was invaluable to us, because at this point, our Navigator could only meet with his clients on the street, or her clients, and in the winter it was cold, and because most of the people that we deal with have been banned from coffee shops and other locations, that was the resource that we had. In May of 2019, the Navigator left us for a full-time position at Bedford McDonald House, and I think you can see the trend. That same month, we were notified that we would again receive $10,000 grant from the city in their budget, which allowed us to hire a third Navigator. That was Andrew. Andrew was experienced in the role and held a degree in criminology and sociology. His knowledge was a huge impact on the program and on our clients. In December of 2019, just 6 months into the job, yes, it happened again, Andrew resigned from his job to take a full-time position with the province to be a youth counselor in addictions. He instantly received a 50% salary increase with benefits. We could not compete with this, and nor will we into the future. We're now in the process of interviewing applicants for the position once again, and we hope to have somebody in place for March. The program has come a long way and has had a huge impact. Although in the beginning we thought of this program as a pilot project, we've learned that it is a valuable resource and a service that the city and its citizens and its visitors and its businesses, and especially our clients that we serve, need. We've seen a change, and we know now that the Navigator is important and needs to return. We learned our clients on the street absolutely need this resource too, and we've witnessed the tragic when one of our young clients died on the street last summer. As you can imagine, it's an emotional job, and we hear sad stories every day. I apologize. At that time, we wrote a letter to the city suggesting that panhandling is not okay. Thank you. It is negative impact on tourism and commerce, yes, but it's not the reason that we act. We act for the people that we impact. And we can no longer allow them to self-harm on the street in full view. We walk by them, we give them a few cents. The gentleman that passed away, we had found a home for him. He was okay. We got his hair cut, we got him a resume, we got him a job interview. He had hope. His brother is also a prolific panhandler on the street. They came from a sad situation. They were a couple of our first clients. We gave him a bus pass, and he had opportunity. But the call to the street was insurmountable. And to take his food allowance, he was comfortable. We made sure he had everything he had needed. We'd visit him. But he could come to town any given day on his bus pass and sit on the corner, and in a matter of minutes have $300 tax-free. It was easy. And often, if we're having a conversation with them, they'll say, just a minute, I've got $8 and somebody just dropped a toonie in, and they'll go and get a pill and then come back. They won't go to the soup kitchen for lunch because that's the most lucrative time. So yes, it hurts a lot, but it hurts them especially. And that's one of the reasons why it's important. We also learned that the program needs partners, like police foot patrol to, because our Navigator cannot be the law and the hand. We know that so much more needs to be done with the Navigator program, and we need it to continue. Just before Andrew's departure from the position, we learned that our ask of a warming centre office space was granted by the provincial government, the location that we sourced at 211 Euston Street and that we have not yet been able to use. Assets like this space and the van that we were gifted last year are absolutely invaluable to the program. And I would tell you, before this space was open, quite often what would happen is that we would come into town at 7 o'clock in the morning when the government offices were closed and stores were closed and it was storming out. These people were already put out of their rooming house, walking the streets and banned from all the coffee shops. And what we had was a van that we could put them in. So to think of the value of that location, it's tremendous, and we certainly appreciate it and hope that it will continue. So that brings us to my thought of the 21st century. When we began the journey, we thought if we built it, they would come. In this day, we can no longer have all the experts behind the door. To our many clients, a door is an insurmountable barrier for help. If they do access help, or if they're granted money for an apartment, it's no use to them because they can't contact the landlord. If they're given information on counseling, it's no use to them. They can't open the door. We sit on the street with them and we learn their stories and we act on their needs and we act as their voice and we hold their hands. And when I say hold their hands, I mean literally. If they go for an interview for an apartment, the Navigator goes with them. Where one might not be brave enough or have the language that the landlord uses, we speak for them. If the landlord has the lineup of people that are willing to take their apartment and the Navigator or the street person standing at the end of the line, he's probably not going to move to the front if he has to speak for himself. Do we have success stories? Absolutely. In 2019, the Street Outreach connected with 43 different individuals who were street involved or homeless, helped 31 with housing support, 8 received identification, which they didn't have, which allowed them to access jobs and government funding. We had resumes done, we did haircuts, we did medical support. 7, we were able to access jobs for them. We even took dogs to the vet. We had a very lovely man who had a dog who wouldn't go to treatment because he needed a foster home for his dog. And his dog was limping and in very bad shape, so we took the dog to the vet and paid for that. We cleaned him up, we got him to services where he was very successful, and now he's in housing. There's a nimbleness and a flexibility and a personal touch, and the fact that they would have their phone, or they can call their service worker with social services, or they can make those introductions for them that you just can't do from behind closed doors. So although our helping tree on PEI is huge and so valuable, if you can't access it, it's no good for you. So we need people on the street that can do that hand-holding and be their voice. So because of this and so much more, we feel the Navigator program must continue. And it's for these reasons that we hope that it will, because there's so much more to do. The little project with the big impact. We do have a progress report that Andrew was ready or completed for us before he left, that if any of you are interested, I could share with you. I email it to you directly. Just for a few statistics on what I did share with you, I would tell you that we deal with a lot more males than we do with females. And it might be a controversial statement, but we do find that females can access help a little bit easier and are easier embraced, so to speak. So of the 43 people that we have dealt with in the last year, 12 were female, 31 were male. Between the ages of 16 and 30, there were 14. And of that, I dare say that more than half of those were 16 to 19. Adults 32 to 50 were 23. Seniors were 6, and we have vets and seniors on the street. 29 of them are panhandling, and 3 of them, we made only one single contact, which was all they needed to get them to the next step. And that might have been buying a bus ticket to get them home, or just dealing with overdue rent. And then they were okay to continue on. So I'll end it there and say that's our story, the Navigator program, and hopefully we'll be successful finding another. and hopefully we'll be able to afford to keep them. And I'd be happy to take any questions. And sorry for, yeah, it is an emotional job, and we feel deeply about it.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
Here, so we'll just allow the committee members to open up for questions, and again, Brad, and then, yeah, go ahead. Brad Travers?
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you so much for your presentation. Very, very enlightening. And I guess, obviously, the Navigator program, just you primed off some stats, is adding very important value. And how far are you away from finding someone so you can continue in March of this year?
It's an interesting process finding the right navigator. And as I suggested to you, we've had experienced workers in that master's degree in education. We've also had somebody who is more, maybe not of that level of education, but the right amount of, I'm going to give you a hug and slap you upside the head because I know, and that worked really well as well. Nothing was better than our experience with Andrew because he was then, when he needed help, was speaking with his peers, and they respected his conversation and he knew where they were coming from. So I would find it hard to go back from there. We get a lot of resumes, everything from somebody who's experienced mental health or addiction in their own world, usually with a family member, so they feel qualified then to help. And their comment is usually is, I know if I could just sit and hold them for a while, they would be okay. And that would be grand if that was the case, but it's not. To former Army folk who say, I can set them straight, also not what we need. And so we need to go back, I think, to social work and experience at that level. So to answer your question, we have about 15 resumes, of which one would be certainly qualified and two of whom I would interview. And so if there's one of those two that I interview in the next few days, we will make that hire.
Brad Travers?
So are you still accepting applications for the...
Yes, up until the time we hire,
Okay.
Absolutely.
And Chair, if it's appropriate, I don't know, what sort of compensation range are you talking about? You mentioned that, you had people leave before and, double their salary moving to the provincial government, but, and again, only if you feel it's appropriate.
Oh, no, there's no secret. DCI is a not-for-profit, and as I explained, our only source of revenue is the levy, and so our entire working budget for everything that we do, including all our programs, is approximately $300,000 a year, our staff and all. And so we've set aside a budget ourselves of $15,000 to go towards wages of a navigator. The city, we've put an ask into them again for $15,000, which would be lovely to receive, and as would 10. And to complete that hire, we would need approval and application from Skills PEI again for one of their programs to cover a portion of the salary, which brings me around to the most we've ever been able to pay navigators $42,000 a year straight out of school. And the difference is because we know that there's a need in the province as well for the same qualifications that we are seeking, we would never be able to pay provincial salary. And I'm not privy to what that is. So it's the difference between.
Brad Travers?
Maybe just one more question. So you mentioned that you do have that warming center at 211 Euston Street that you've been given permission to use, but you haven't been able to really take advantage of that too much yet. I was just wondering if you could expand on that, and if there's anything we can do as a committee to help or push so that we can allow you to take advantage of that, or what are your barriers there, maybe is a better way of asking it.
Early last fall, Andrew and I approached the province with this request with a best practice example from my colleagues from Atlantic Canada and beyond, where such a centre is available. And the bigger the city, the bigger the centre and their assets. And so as the van from the previous administration granted us was extremely helpful, we also knew, as I mentioned, this walking in the storm after you have to leave your residence, and also because we share our office with another organization, and bringing people up to our office wouldn't be appropriate. And so we needed someplace for Andrew to meet with people other than the van. In Halifax, their warming center, welcome center, so to speak, has the washer and dryer and the phone and the computers and the showers and the resources and social work and nursing. A nurse actually accompanies their navigator on the street, and their street patrol police officers are very much partners with that as well. And so we use that as an example where all the resources would be under one roof, which means that we could work really quickly and nimbly in order to get people the services that they need immediately. Our ask was that the navigator would share this space with whomever else needed it, as well as our clients, but that the washer dryer was really important, the showers, which we could never access, a phone, a number where clients could pass it out, because a lot of the things that you learn here is clients have to call every morning if they want to go to the treatment center for addiction, and then they have to wait for the phone call back. But they have neither a phone to call, and they have certainly not a phone to get the message. And so our navigator was always the source. If the call came in at 11 o'clock at night, he got it and picked them up the next morning and took them there, because you can get a ride back in town from the treatment center, but one has to find one's own transportation there. So all of those things that we take for granted at our house, we need it in this warming center. The reason we haven't been able to take advantage of it yet was that it opened just shortly after Andrew left, and I understand that although that was what we sourced it, thinking that was the absolute best location for a facility like that, that it's soon not going to be available because the owner's going to renovate it. Although we have an excellent idea for another location that we'd be happy to speak to you at a later date. So I think that there's still a seat available for us when the next navigator is hired.
Keith McDonald?
You know, it's interesting, and I was part of this process when it started, and kudos to Dawn and her board for taking this initiative, because it doesn't always work this way when you're in the city and you have businesses that have people sitting outside their door. You usually don't get them working like you have done. So kudos to you. I'm curious, like going forward, and it gets back to what Brad talked about on how to keep an employee. And I mean, it's, you know, it's not easy in any business you're in, but if it's a matter of money, you know, this initiative, I think, is, you're the first point of contact before they get to sometimes Bedford McDonald House, or before they get to Lacey House, or wherever it may be. Mm-hmm. And I think it's extremely important. And if you look at the people that are actually panhandling now when you drive by, and I talk to the same gentleman all the time, but they seem to be getting younger.
It's true.
And I don't know if that's just a trend or something that we really should be starting to be concerned about, and how we adapt to it. But I certainly give a lot of credit to you, Don, and the people that worked for you for getting this going. And I know when we presented you with the van, and it wasn't the greatest van, but it was a van, it certainly works well. And even getting people to and from, you know, Mount Herbert.
Huge.
It's, you know, you don't realize how these stories affect people until you get on the inside. And I'll tell you, when you became very passionate about what you were talking about, and I know some of the people that you were talking about because we dealt with them together, but I mean, it's a very touchy issue, and I think any government of the day is going to work with you, I'm assuming, because this is something that, if you want to talk and keep using the words most vulnerable islanders, that's these people. So I think any government, it doesn't matter what color it is going to start, hopefully work with you and continue to build on what you've done so far, because you don't always see the economic side working with the side that you're working with now, and I think it's pretty special. But it's in every other city too. So I think it's important that you keep going in that direction. That's all, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith. Great.
To that point, and I will say this because I think it's really important to say this, in a city like Halifax, which isn't very far from us, and I won't even talk about my counterparts who every day are dealing with the opiate crisis and people literally dying outside their doorsteps. But if we were to compare ourselves even with Halifax, their situation with their panhandlers is insurmountable, and they'll never fix it. They can only learn how to navigate it and deal with it. It is fixable here, and I know that it's easy to criticize people in our situation that are saying, don't give panhandlers money. It's don't feed the bear. And it's not because we don't want them to be successful or we don't want them to have that sandwich. I would applaud you to give them the sandwich. But it is self-harming on the street, and it's not to their benefit. And it dilutes what we try to do. So if we do get them that house and that allowance or that job interview, but that call is so strong and so easy to go back, it's not necessary. And I have so many examples of cities and situations where panhandling has been outlawed or it's been moved from the mainstream. It's okay if you want to panhandle, but you have to do it over there. And if you find that lucrative, that's fine, but you can't do it here. So it's a bit of a deterrent. But it's no longer acceptable. And shame on us if we can't embrace the couple dozen people who are involved, because we have help for every one of them. There's a place for every one of them. And heaven knows there's better for every one of them, which is exactly what we want. We shouldn't allow them to settle for so much less because they're deserving of so much more.
So well said. Hannah, Val?
Thank you, Chair. There's a couple of things, Dawn, that you'd mentioned. One was around, obviously, the tenuous state of the funds and sort of patching together, which is unfortunately a pretty common story for NGOs doing NGO work. But you also mentioned a lot of things that you're spending money on in addition to the salary. And you've talked about the impact of being able to provide somebody with ID, that's $75, or a bus pass, that's $60, or helping with rent or groceries. So is that money something that you're doing out of your own budget as well? Because I don't hear you can't get that from skills. So is that coming from your internal budget?
Yes. And also the grant that the city gives us, we are allowed to spend that on such assets.
Right.
The province, thank goodness, will cover dental work, for example, for somebody. But if teeth are in terrible shape, they will pull them. Mm-hmm. If we have a woman whose teeth are terrible in the front and she needs huge dental work and she's lived with pain for many years and infections, she can't get a job because of it, because we've tried, and she gets an allowance to have her teeth fixed, that means teeth pulled.
Yeah.
But from our budget, we have her teeth fixed.
Yeah.
And the self-confidence and what it does to somebody's life to say, I just can't believe somebody did that for me, and how they can progress from something like that. But there isn't another resource for that unless there's a charity that provides it, right? But you also have to know them and also be in their confidence enough that they will realize and trust you that this is something that we're happy to do for you. No different than getting her hair cut or getting a man shaved and his hair cleaned up, or taking them to allow them to shop for their own clothes for a job interview. It's all of those things that are extras, one might say, but they're not extras to you when it's everything to you. It is your self-confidence, and it makes it, you realize that you're important enough that you can go on to the next step. So it's those things that the flexibility of the Navigator make happen.
Hannah?
Yeah, I have spoken before in this committee about the challenges of a dental program that does not address dental care, but rather just dental treatment, which is where the solution is to remove teeth, and it is something that, again, we take for granted if we've been able to make those choices before. So I appreciate you raising that. I think the other thing that this connects to is that the committee meeting that we had this morning, which was the Special Committee on Poverty, was talking about how careful we have to be when we speak about all the different ways that poverty presents, and how we speak to and about people living in those different circumstances. So we have working poor, and we have people who are on social assistance. But this group of people that you're talking about are on nothing. And whether that's a small group because it's PEI in Charlottetown or not, it doesn't make any difference to those people to having something like this. But what I'm also hearing is that you're filling a gap that nobody else is filling. Because
That's absolutely so.
right, because until these things happen, somebody who is homeless can't get onto social assistance because they don't exist, they don't have an address or ID. If you don't have a home address, you can't apply, like you said, for services, you can't answer the phone. And so that data that you're collecting is about real people, but it's critical. And I am frankly really disappointed that you haven't had better engagement, or am I hearing that you haven't had sort of better support or engagement to the stage from the province, from that aspect of it, which is people who are most vulnerable, who should be served by our tools and functions that we have available. Is it just because they just don't fit in the right box? Like, what do you see? Because this is a big gap.
It is a big gap. And I would be the first to say that, again, the island has so many learned people behind the door and so many available service and such a huge helping tree. You can bring it up in your computer. It's huge.
Huge.
There's none of our clients that would be able to navigate it. And also the clients that we're dealing with, they didn't have the home upbringing that we did. They didn't have the TV. They didn't read the newspaper. They just fell through school, and probably most all the people that we deal with left school in grade 9 to 11. And they only have information from the family that they make on the street, which is not always the best advice. So it's not like they know who to call, or and they don't have access to the computer, and so it's sort of like, well, so-and-so did this, so I'll do that. They don't have the language to use, and they don't have the knowledge resource to seek out the help that they need. And when I mentioned the 21st century, and we thought that, maybe I thought, if we built it, they would come. I think in the 21st century, the knowledge base can't be behind doors when your client is on the street. And so we are the only ones doing it. And a roundabout way to get back to your question, we are absolutely, explicitly not experts in what we do. We are fulfilling a need that we saw to the best of our abilities with the partners that we can resource. So I don't think that it's the province doesn't want to help. We are a new entity that never existed before. And ideally what would happen, and I've said this every year since we started this, ideally, rather than us, the non-experts, taking this on, a street navigator would be an employee of the province, and they would have an entire department that would branch out. We are kind of 24/7 depending on who we work with, and as I said, the navigator gives everyone their phone number. If we give a client their worker's number and it's past 4, they can't access them, or their worker has so many other clients, and so when they get to them, they'll get to them, but their emergency is right now, and we're right there, so that makes the difference. So it's the personal touch that makes the difference. Over the years, in conversations with the province, nobody ever said that they wouldn't fund us. In fact, the $20,000 grant has been talked about quite often. Follow quickly, but I don't know what department that would come from, or how we would get that to you, or whether it be a grant, and so those conversations I'm sure are ongoing. We've just never received it. But I think that if this not-for-profit, and although I say we're not experts as far as the vocational training, I can tell you we're the experts on the people that we're talking about, because we do know who their father is. But if we're going to continue it, there's no doubt in my mind that 6 months is probably going to be the turnaround. And these people all have student loans, and they went into their vocation to get the jobs that the province have to offer. And this isn't a necessarily fun job. You're out in the cold, and you're talking to people that don't necessarily want to speak to you, and you're going where angels fear to trod to drag them out of apartments and such in order to get them to their appointments on time or make sure they're getting to their treatment. It's not easy, and you have to have a passion for it. And more money and a big office or a small office would be pretty attractive. But we do, if we're going to carry on, if it's going to be DCI, we are going to have to match the salary to at least make it interesting in hopes that we can keep people.
Hannah?
Yeah, I think just my last question was around obviously the warming centre that has opened has had a huge impact. It was a critical piece of the ecosystem that we were missing in terms of where do you go when you have to leave the Blooming House or Bedford at 8 o'clock in the morning. And it is has provided a critical piece of that, but the match is the provision of the services into that space. And so again, concern that that this function is not kind of incorporated into that, because frankly I didn't know that came from DCI. The way it was presented and discussed was that it was an initiative of Bedford MacDonald House and the province and a few other partners, which may still be the case, but that there is a logic in it being associated with the program, which is meeting the needs of the people who it serves.
Yes.
And you've mentioned that space is going to be closing. I would really hope that we can assist in advocating for the inclusion of the Street Navigator program in the next iteration of that centre. So I'd be happy to maybe talk to you about that offline on how we can champion that. Thank you, Chair. Another question. That was just a statement.
I just didn't know. I was just giving her the time to communicate. Trish?
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to acknowledge something that you've mentioned a few times. So the value of having a navigator who is on the street, on the ground, actually engaging with people on a day-to-day basis, and they become the experts in the people who are facing these challenges. Know who's their father, what's their story, what are the opportunities there, right? And I think it's quite remarkable that the navigators have been able to build those relationships in the short amount of time that they're in those positions. And the limitations of not being able to pay a wage that would and have benefits and all the things, and an office that would encourage or be more likely to have someone in a longer term. So I wonder, if you could, what your thoughts are on what the impacts. I mean, you've achieved so much with this program. What more would occur if those relationships could continue to be built over time, and that knowledge base isn't lost every 6 months?
Yeah. Well, I could only dream. The relationships are easily built, I think, because the navigator is a baseball cap, t-shirt, jean-wearing guy that's literally on the street, and we encourage them. Their first question when they approach somebody is, "Hi, I'm the navigator. I'm going to assist people on the street. What are you doing here today?" so to speak. And conversation progresses a little bit, and the first question always is, "If I could do one thing to help you today, what would that be?" And often it's sort of things like, if I had a scarf, it would mean the world to me. And so we get a scarf that very afternoon and bring it back the next day, and you hand the scarf over, and all of a sudden it's, "You actually did it?" This sort of thing. I can tell you in all of the encounters that we have, there's never a grand request, but it has a huge impact, and it's easily fulfilled, but there wasn't another source where they could get them. And that's where that conversation happens. If you give somebody a gift card so they could go in and sit in a restaurant for their birthday lunch, it's life-changing to them, and it's something that nobody's ever done for them, including their home. So it's those little things that engage their trust, and it's not like we're trying superficially to gain their trust. We're sincere when we do it, and they know that we'll be back and that they'll be there day after day. The downside is that we keep losing them, and the people who are on this track quickly go this way, and starting that over is heartbreaking. And if I told you that there was 43, I could name 20 that I know probably by the first name that would probably be out of these numbers today if we had that continual contact. The resources are still there that they had in the province, but they won't reach out to them any quicker now than they would to begin with, but they would have through the navigator. So to answer your question, I think that there's grand opportunity, and it's been a learning curve for us, but we do have the blessing of having best practice connections with BIAs all over Atlantic Canada and nationally and through the US that we can steal from. We call it tweak and duplicate. So I think that there are grand things to be done, whether it is through a not-for-profit, and we have no ego in anything that we do, and I would say that clearly, and no expertise, as I said before as well. So if somebody were to take this idea and run with it, that could do it bigger and better than us, who had better resources, who took it in-house, if we were to ask to be sit on an advisory council rather than being hands-on, it's tough to, when the Navigator arrives every night at 5 and they says, you wouldn't guess what happened today, and we sit around and have a little cry. And I'm sure they don't do that in professional offices, but it hits us hard. Or, if we celebrate their successes, and if we hear a complaint from a merchant who says, I can't use that front door anymore, everyone's walking around or they're not entering it, it's not, should I call the police and move them? It's no, we'll send the Navigator to talk to them. Because as we said, these are somebody's children, and there is opportunity for them. And again, I would say that it's doable in PEI and in Charlottetown because we can embrace the few that we have. So our vision would be that we would continue the program and it would be ongoing.
Trish?
Thank you, Chair. And I want to also acknowledge, we're talking about one person, one Navigator who's taking on this incredible role. And you mentioned the value of them being available sort of, 24/7, having a phone that they can be reached. And, that's a lot for one person to take on. I wonder if similar Navigator programs across the country that you spoke of, if there are examples where there's, usually, is there more than one Navigator in other situations, or is it often one person taking on that responsibility?
Halifax has one Navigator.
Yeah.
And he works Barrington and Spring Garden. And when we hire a Navigator, the first thing we do is send him over or her over to meet with their Navigator and look at their program and discuss how they do things. And anytime there's a learning opportunity, if it's Navigators meeting in DAC, which is Downtown Atlantic Canada, we send them there as well. One is absolutely doable in Charlottetown. And the other thing that you become aware of is you can't be everything to everybody, and we try to work with motivated people. There are people on the street that we know their names and what their story is, and they will tell us, I'm going to be sitting here collecting this money in this manner until I turn 65, and when I get that pension, I won't do it anymore. But until then, you may as well go away and talk to somebody who needs it. That's just the nature of the beast. And so we certainly gravitate to the people who are most motivated to change their situation. And it's just the fact that not everybody would choose to. And sometimes the ones that wouldn't choose to aren't motivated are the ones that maybe most need that visionary bylaw to say that you're just not allowed to do it anymore because there's better things for you. But to answer your question, I think one is sufficient in Charlottetown, but they would be 100% more efficient if the Navigator program was backed up with a police foot patrol.
Okay, thank you. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
Great. Heath McDonald?
Yeah, just a quick comment. Don't sell yourself short on the word expertise, because passion is your expertise. So I think you got to keep that in mind. But, you talked about having a government employee or what have you, but I certainly hope that if that happens, and that would be wonderful to get consistency and longevity into a position. But I hope that person is not at the Shaw Building or the Jones Building or the Sullivan Building. I hope that person stays, whether it's in your office or somewhere in that vicinity, because I think that's the effect that you're having, is not, you're taking all that other stuff out of it, the bureaucracy and what have you, and you're on the ground on boot patrol. And I think that's where the success of this is coming from. And I think we've got lots of people down, and I've been there alongside Brad. So I mean, it's I think that's important to keep at that level. So I wouldn't be in favor of saying moving into an office in social services out in the Ellis Brothers or something like that. I would certainly say you've got something unique here with the Downtown Business Inc, and I think hopefully you can keep it like that. Good.
Brad?
Thanks, Chair. So I wanted to echo the comments of Heath there. Sometimes NGOs can do things better than government even can do them. And so I don't think necessarily bringing this into the government would be a positive step forward, but I do appreciate the fact that you're lobbying for more funding, and I'm hoping that you've been in contact with the provincial government. But I did want to mention that, or remind you that we have a new minister responsible for Charlottetown, in Natalie Jameson. And if you haven't been able to meet with her yet, I'm sure she would love to meet with you, and I'm sure she'd be a very big advocate for you within government. So
Excellent.
I wanted to throw that out there. I'll give you my contact information as well, in case, you know, you want to connect with me. We already talked about that a little
Yes.
bit beforehand. But, I mean, Minister Hudson, I don't know if you've met with Minister Hudson yet. Okay, but I know he would be happy to meet with you and learn about this, and I will bring it to his attention as well, so it can be considered. And I'm currently the minister responsible for Skills PEI,
Well then,
so I can definitely bring that forward. There we go. So I just
they've been
wanted to-
hugely supportive to us, and we've been most appreciative of it. Otherwise, without it, we wouldn't have gotten off the road, the platform to begin with. So we do appreciate all the support we've received from Skills PEI. So when we talk about government support, you know, that is obviously government support. That's gotten us this far.
Just two quick questions. What's it like when you watch somebody go through the process of, you know, cleaning them up and giving them that haircut and giving them back a little bit of dignity? What happens to that person? You know, can you just talk about what's that like to witness that?
Well, as you can imagine, it's a tremendous thing. You can't downplay the importance of making somebody feel special or visible, which they think that they're not. Because even those giving people money on the street, and it's a documented fact, makes somebody feel good. And they don't notice necessarily the person that they're giving it to, and they don't really consider where the money's going. It's just they feel like they've done a good deed. I've already stated that we find it detrimental. So that person on the street feels invisible and worthy of a handout, and we don't want people to feel that way anymore. And so to your point, when we get them the shave or take them to a professional barber shop, or take a woman to get her hair done or her teeth fixed and take them to shop for themselves, the week before they weren't willing to go to have their professional resume done, and they weren't interested in going to have that doctor's visit, because that's the mode they're in, and that's how they look and that's how they feel. But it's tremendously uplifting when you see the transformation in them, when you give them back some of that self-confidence. And often they say, nobody's ever done that for me before. That's not a cliche statement I'm saying, it's a truthful statement. It's something that they show that appreciation to the navigator who's done it out of the goodness of his heart, out of kindness, out of the job, but also recognizing the importance it is to that one individual.
Wonderful answer. And this committee will report back to the legislature when we sit in April, or probably about mid-April. I think the report would come out. If there was one or two things that you would like to see in the committee report, what would you pick? What would be a couple things you'd like to see us present to the Legislative Assembly?
Well, I am hard and fast on my thought that the learner people can't, in the 21st century, be behind the closed doors. That we need somebody on the street, and whether it's me or you, that's a necessity. And if we all agree that that's necessary and that we are actually making an impact on lives, which are hugely valued, then we do need the resources. We are willing to put our hand up to say that we'll take on the management and we'll be the front line, so to speak, but we're going to need the resources, because I think it speaks volumes that we're going to lose those people, those qualified people, over and over. So we need the support in showing, and it's always going to have to be through funds, that if we take on the work, will you help us, support us through finance? The warming center, the welcome center, which we'll call, I guess, ongoing, it's imperative that that continue. Again, for people's dignity, meeting with them or getting them ready for their job interview in the back of the van isn't the way to go. And so that's really important. And we haven't been able to access the showers and things that we've needed over this last couple of years. And so now that, again, we built it and they've come, we need to see that continue. So those would be our two things. I think that not everyone is aware of who DCI is, so certainly they're not aware of the Navigator program. They don't know who manages it. Most of the things we do, people, public assume that it's a product of the city of Charlottetown. I would wish that this group would share with your people who are behind the closed doors, the people who we so respect in social services and such, would be made aware that it's okay to take the phone call from the Navigator, that it's not somebody who's not connected or somebody who's not doing the work, and answer that call, because that's been a big barrier to us as well, that the Navigator can't get their calls answered. And so how does that client get their calls answered? And so when they say, I call, nobody answers me, it's true, it doesn't happen. And I think sometimes that's just an educational thing as well, that we're with you, we're one of your team, and we want to be able to support what you're doing, and we need you absolutely for support, so take the call. So we would hope that information would be circulated inside to say that Navigator's an important partner.
Wow, great. Everybody okay? Well, you did a great job here today. It was a very important hour with us, and we'll make sure that we get some good pieces in our report. But we'll thank you very much, and much luck in finding a new Navigator and continued success with DCI.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate your time. Thank you for listening, and thank you for inviting me here today. And know that our door is always open, and any of you can access it at any time. There's no information that we have that we won't share. And in advance, I appreciate your support.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you.
Take a short recess. You'll be ready to go soon? Yeah, okay, so we'll be ready to go. We'll take a 3-minute break, and we'll be back for part 2. Yes, thanks a lot. And before we move ahead with the next part, number 4, if it's okay with the committee, we will move to, we'll give our guests a little bit more time, and maybe we'll just move ahead with 5, A, B, C, D, and then 6, just so we can skip ahead to that. They're ready to go for 3 o'clock. So if we can get some of that business done, if that's okay with the committee, and then our presenters should be close to 3 o'clock. So is that okay with everyone? Okay, so moving ahead with 5, I'm just going to pass it over to Sean to give us a kind of an update on things and discussion.
Sure. A couple of meetings ago, we had been planning to do early discussion of the committee report. We ended up not doing it partly because we had most of the regular members absent at the time, so that was put off for future. There's a couple of ways we can get back to that. We can either try to do the same thing we did before, which was schedule it as an attachment to an existing meeting. Something usually that's done at the end of a given meeting so we can go in camera. Or alternatively, we could schedule an in-camera meeting just for the discussion of the committee report, even if it's preliminary. And when they're in-camera meetings, we have a lot of flexibility in terms of the scheduling, because that's often done over in J. Angus McLean. It's not booked quite as often as this space is. So if the committee decided they wanted to do an in-camera session strictly for the report, we've got a little more flexibility there in terms of how and when we go about that. So it's a couple of options for the committee to discuss and consider now.
Does anybody want to touch base about that, or would you like to have a separate meeting, or
I just add it on to another meeting, maybe? Wouldn't that be the might be the easiest?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Would the plan then, if this sounds good to the committee, try the same thing we did before, which was added as an item at the end of the agenda for the next scheduled meeting we have? And we could have some preliminary in-camera discussions of the report at that time.
Perfect. Yeah, that's what we'll do.
Okay, we have consensus?
Consensus, yeah. Yeah, perfect. So then, so that's A, and then we'll start that pretty soon. And so B, March break. Just seeing with the committee, there's a couple people that said they could present during that March break time slot. Mike Redmond, the PEI Nurses Union, have actually requested a March break slot. So they're looking at March 18th for that. I don't know, the committee, would that be okay to maybe look at that date? Now, I think we just did something with the poverty committee for March 18th.
Yes, but it was only for the morning, so we should still be okay for an afternoon.
Great. So that is, well, that's a Wednesday again? Yeah, so Wednesday at 1:30, so we'll keep our regular time frame. Just wanted to make sure everybody was okay. You're okay, mister?
I mean, it being March break and having the 2 children, like I know others, so we are planning on going away one day that week.
Okay.
But just for one day. I don't think it's the Wednesday, so I should be okay. But if it isn't, I will pursue a sub. How about that?
Okay. Perfect. Sounds good. So,
Guess I'm going.
yeah.
He's not one of the 2 kids, no.
And I'll also mention too, the Canada Games also talked about that date as potential a good date for them to come in. So we'll continue on with that schedules. So then C is just dates to be considered. Canada Games, March 18th and 25th. The College of Physicians and Surgeons, possible March 4th or 5th.
I could maybe speak to that a bit.
You certainly can.
The College of Physicians and Surgeons, part of why there's some uncertainty on their date is they wanted to have a presentation with multiple representatives, but they're having trouble working with the schedules of the various doctors who might appear for this. Right now, there's still a possibility. We had them sort of penciled in as a group for March 4th at one point that then got canceled. It now still may happen, but if it happens, it will be with a single doctor. If that's agreeable to the committee, one of the officials from the College of Physicians and Surgeons who's prepared and willing to come in and do a presentation as a single representative of the college on that date.
Yes, Trish? Yeah.
So but the preference of the college is to choose a different date so that they can bring additional people in, or are they okay with having the one person, one doctor represent? What is their preference?
They didn't seem ironclad on either option as far as it goes. Their original intent was to have multiple people. I think they just would have liked it if there wasn't just one person carrying the load, so to speak. But they've been having real problems scheduling multiple people to come in here for us before the host sits. Because of that, what's probably going to happen is either we'll end up scheduling something for them after the house sitting, or from the sounds of things, we still have the opportunity to get one of their reps in here for March 4th. There's at least one other date that we've marked down there as a possibility as well, which I think was the 5th.
5th, yeah.
Which is actually a Thursday and not our regular day, but if we were able to find a slot for it, it's possible, they told us, that we could have a couple of doctors on that day, but they haven't even confirmed that yet. They know that at least one of them would be available that day, possibly a second, but it really isn't too different from the option they gave us for March 4th as things stand.
So we're looking at Thursday, and I think that there's a caucus meeting on Thursday afternoon for the 5th.
I do have other, yeah, the 5th is not great for me either. I do have other things scheduled, yeah.
Morning?
Does my committee meet that morning, the 5th?
Natural resources,
No,
we don't have anything slotted on that date yet. Although that it's always possible that could change. One of the folks we have requests out to could ask for that, so it's hard to say for sure. It's probably better, just from a logistics standpoint, if we can stick with the 4th, if possible, in which case we'd have a single rep from the college come in to speak to the committee on the 4th, or alternatively, we look for a date that's most likely post-sitting. To get a larger group from the college in. But that's up to the committee, however they'd like to pursue that.
I think that, no, that wasn't a hand up. I think probably the 4th, and then we extend it to as many doctors that want to submit as possible. Maybe we'll ask a common question to anybody that wants to write a written submission, and we would read those out, or if they'd like to do a video, and just want to make sure it's open to everybody about this particular topic, and we're seeking input. So we'll continue on with the 4th. We cannot make the 5th work. It's just too busy, not enough time. So that's that. Unless anybody else on the committee wants to talk about that further. Nope. Yep. Trish?
I would also add to that if they would prefer to wait until they could have more people, if that's their preference, then I think we should accommodate that, but,
Sure.
I'm okay with whatever is most comfortable for them, personally.
When we spoke earlier today, it sounded like they were okay with either option. That a Dr. Moyce, I believe it is, had said that March 4th was entirely doable as a single presenter if we were okay with that.
Okay.
But that they were trying to see if they could find ways to have multiple folks as well, if it were possible.
Okay. Yep.
Well, we'll leave it to you to correspond to. Obviously, we want to get as many people in as possible. Corey?
I see the Medical Society says they would rather not appear until June or in the fall. Is that? Did they give a reason why? Yeah.
I can speak to that a bit. This came up in a previous meeting, and we've had a couple of rounds of correspondence attached to it. Basically, it was partly their state of busyness, they're occupied with other things. It's partly the fact that one of the things they're occupied with right now is work related to this topic that they haven't finished yet, and they kind of thought it might be better if they talked to us further down the line when they've finished working out what they're doing on it now. So they'd sent us correspondence that indicated they would prefer to appear at a later date after this particular sitting coming up. The committee did discuss it further, and essentially the committee settled on a series of follow-up questions, sort of making sure that there wasn't any way to bring them in here even for a partial presentation before the House sits. We haven't heard anything back from that correspondence yet.
Corey, anything else? No.
Sorry, I just hadn't realized it was discussed at the last meeting. My bad.
No worries.
Oh, no trouble.
It's good to bring that up. Okay, is everybody okay? Should we move on, or did we touch base on that enough? With the College of Physicians and Surgeons?
Yeah.
I guess,
It sounds like we're going for March 4th, unless something changes as far as that goes. And whatever else was marked down here, April 1st, or we've got a couple of dates locked in there, a couple of presenters rather. People from both Health and Wellness and Health PEI are slated to come in April 1st, partly for the Kings County Hospital topic that we're going to be exploring. Also recruitment officials. There's people expected in on that date for that as well.
Correct.
And everything else at this point is still, for the earlier dates in March, a bit up in the air. There's several different suggestions from different groups. A number of them seem to want March 18th for some reason, and no love for March 11th. I can't quite explain it. But eventually we'll have sorted out who gets slotted where.
perfect. Great. So that would be we just worked on C and D. So if everybody's okay with the organizations that are coming in, we could move on to new business. Anybody have new business at this time? No? New business? Okay, perfect. And think about that. You can always bring it up at the end. But so after we've done most of our work there, and we're ready to bring in our presenters. So maybe I'll just give them a couple minutes to get settled in, and then we'll get ready to begin. So we'll just go off. So we're back, and we're ready to receive a briefing from Jane Ledwell, Executive Director, and Debbie Langston, Chairperson of the PEI Advisory Council for the Status of Women regarding the 2018 Equality Report Card. So welcome to the committee, and take your time, and we're excited that you're here.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm Jane Ledwell.
Debbie Langston.
Great. And so good afternoon, and I'm the Executive Director, as was mentioned, of the PEI Advisory Council on the Status of Women. Debbie is the appointed Chairperson of the Council, and we're honored to contribute to the important work of the Health and Social Development Standing Committee by providing some information. So we'll take some turns in speaking, but I'll give a little bit of background to begin with. So the PEI Advisory Council on the Status of Women Report Card Project is something that is undertaken by the Advisory Council. So the Advisory Council on the Status of Women is an arm's-length government agency. It was established in January 1975, and that makes this our 45th anniversary year. So congratulations to us. Executive Council appoints the 9 members of the Advisory Council from among applicants to engage PEI and from women across Prince Edward Island. The Council has a legislated mandate under the PEI Advisory Council on the Status of Women Act, which requires us to advise government and educate the public on issues that relate to the status of women. And the Council understands women to include anyone who identifies as a woman, and our work is done with consideration of all genders and with attention to how gender intersects and interacts with other identities, including race, class, language, immigration status, ability, and so on. So in order to contextualize the 2018 Equality Report Card, and because Council members will be producing another report card in 2021, so it's an ongoing project, we're going to provide some information on the process that led to the 2018 report card, as well as to its content. So the Equality Report Card is a project that was undertaken by the Council more than a dozen years ago to work collaboratively with government to assess progress on gender equality goals. Through a succession of Council members, dozens of Council members, and now a 4th new mandate of government, the Council has used the Equality Report Card as a tool to press for more equity and inclusion, to recognize government accomplishments, and to identify where more work is needed to enhance gender equality. I hope we will demonstrate today that the report card has been a very effective tool and has brought about a great deal of positive collaboration. So a little bit of history. 20 years ago, the then members of the Advisory Council on the Status of Women, before either of our time, identified a desire to be more proactive and less reactive in their recommendations to provincial government. As a result, they initiated a series of policy guides on gender issues. The topics of the guides were selected by Council members, supported by gender and diversity analysis, and they included a consultative process for developing recommendations. In the years following publication of those policy guides, Council members would sometimes hear news, sometimes just through the grapevine, that government had acted on a recommendation, but the moment had been lost to acknowledge that action. Or sometimes they would hear nothing and would not know if the recommendation went into a vacuum or if it was taken up internally. There was no consistent way to track progress on recommendations, and that meant there was no easy way to praise government for taking positive steps or to hold government to account when they took no action or when situations worsened. So the Council members around 2006 decided to undertake a collaborative process to follow up on recommendations. And in 2007, during an election campaign, Council gave notice that they were going to do the Equality Report Card pilot project, and they outlined in public during the election campaign what would be assessed and how. So Council selected from the recommendations they had made in the policy guides and in other submissions to government over the 7 to 10 previous years to determine categories, to set priority action areas that they were going to assess. And as mentioned, the process was introduced during an election period, and that was important so that whatever government was elected would be held to the same process, held accountable in the same way. It wasn't responsive to platforms, it was responsive to the recommendations that had been made over time. The pilot Equality Report Card then came out in 2008, and based on feedback from government and the community, the process was refined and improved. And the 2009 Equality Report Card followed a much improved, refined model, and a subsequent report in 2011 was benchmarked to 2009 results. So a new mandate of government began in October 2011, And so a new process for the report card began in response to that mandate of government. So a new model was refined, again, using feedback from council members and using feedback from government representatives and community representatives. And the priority issues that council set out to assess were made public shortly after the election. And then the council published a report card in 2013 with another in 2015, benchmarked to the 2013 results. Spring 2015 saw a new government mandate, and again, council members accepted feedback from the government and from community about the report card model and made a number of changes, but also decided to publish one equality report card during that 2015 to 2019 mandate of government. Decided that should be published in the third year of the mandate to assess a longer stretch of achievements and also to allow some months before any election for further progress on gender equality goals. So if there were things to be held accountable for in the 2018 report card, there was still time to act on them after the report came out. So therefore, the 2018 Equality Report Card was the only report card published during the mandate of the previous government. Council members assessed progress on gender equality from May 2015, when the mandate of the McLaughlin government began, until December 31st, 2017, when the reporting period ended, and the council assessed progress towards identified priorities and other considerations in 9 categories. And those categories were making equality a priority, which is really gender and diversity analysis and how it's used and applied across government. Women in decision-making, violence prevention, access to justice, women's health, supports for caregivers, adult education and training, diversity and inclusion, and women's economic status, which is essentially poverty issues. The council also identified 10 good practices for special mention and for bonus grades in the report card in 2018. So I'll let Debbie tell you a little bit about some of the results in the 2018 report card.
So the overall grade council awarded to government in June 2018 was a B-. That was for work from May 2015 to the 31st of December 2017 to address the equality goals of women and underrepresented groups on the island. This grade from council was meant to demonstrate important but still uneven progress towards equality goals in PEI, and B- was the highest grade for government since 2011, when major improvements in early childhood care and education boosted the grade. Some highlights in the report included the establishment of the Women's Wellness Centre and sexual health services for all genders, achievement of gender parity on applications and appointments to engage PEI agencies, boards and commissions, led by those focused on health, increasing support for youth mental health, such as the Insight programme and the student wellbeing teams in schools, continuing support for equality supportive projects in the community, sector-led but by not-for-profit organisations across the island, and evidence of greater understanding than ever before of the importance of gender analysis, diversity and inclusion in work done across all departments of government.
And it's important to note that after the cutoff date for assessments for the 2018 report card, there were also improvements in social assistance rates, and later still, there was release of a poverty reduction action plan that council considered an important step, but those were still urgently being awaited in June 2018 when the report card was published. I wanted to, in response to the presentation that was before Debbie arrived, just note that one of the things that came out as well was the challenge of navigating systems. Like when there were some wonderful programs and services available, people identified the need, especially in focus groups, identified the need for advocates and for navigators to assist them in accessing those programs and services. And they also identified that Prince Edward Island being a small place, that who you were working with mattered a lot. Who you would have as a worker would make a difference in your ability to access services. And so those are the kinds of larger trends that were also captured in the 2018 report.
Okay. So rather than spend a lot of time examining the conclusions in the 2018 Equality Report Card, I'd like to take some time to review how the Council reached their conclusions. The fair and collaborative process of the Equality Report Card is the heart of the project. There is a lot of work by government and council members behind the final B- grade on the front page of the report. The first step after council members decided to continue the Equality Report Card project for the mandate of government that began in 2015 was to consult with government representatives to determine the timeline and the model of assessment. The council members looked at what worked well and what didn't work well on previous report cards and considered feedback that they had received. After consultation, we confirmed the same list of categories that had been used before, but updated the priority actions that they wanted to see government movement on. We made priority actions known to government and to the public. Next, information gathering began. So like previous report cards, the information in the 2018 Equality Report Card comes from a variety of sources. The most important source, however, is government departments. So for every report card, including the 2018 Equality Report Card, every department of government received a customised questionnaire with some questions relevant to every department and some questions specific to each department. Since the beginning of the Equality Report Card project, every single department of government has completed a questionnaire on its progress and on gender equality every single time they have been asked, so we've had a 100% response rate. They have done so with the support of the Interministerial Women's Secretariat and through a process of assigning a report card liaison from each department to take the lead on reporting. Council staff compiled the information from departmental questionnaires and provided it in full summary to all council members, in full and in summary to all council members. Council staff also coordinated focus groups during this time and shared summary points from focus groups with council members to assist in our assessments. Using the information from the questionnaires as basis of evidence, council members each independently completed a survey to offer their draft grades and to support their assessment with the evidence that we found most compelling. So a lot of that was done at home. It involved an awful lot of work going through all the responses, pulling out information that we found supported what government was saying. At the beginning of May 2018, council members held a collaborative workshop day to look at the survey results and to come to a consensus on draft grades. So I was the chairperson at the time and I facilitated the consensus building workshop. Where the survey was where we generally agreed, those results we kind of confirmed that agreement and that was moved into the draft. But where there was maybe some disparity or where there wasn't consensus, there were discussions, we would look at the evidence that supported the assessments and then come to a consensus before submitting those ones. A draft report card was built from the consensus on draft grades and direction to evidence to include. As this draft was sent back to government departments for feedback, council staff members also consulted with community organisations on parts of the draft to validate results.
So a tremendous amount of work goes into the report card, and we have to acknowledge that one of the challenges of the project is it's designed to influence elected decision makers, but it relies on extra work by public servants. And the relationship building in the course of the project is with them rather than with the elected officials through the course of the project until it's published. But that, that doesn't mean that we don't seek opportunities to provide information to the MLAs. It's just that there's a lot of work that has to happen behind the scenes. So again, it's important to note that all feedback from community organizations and from government was compiled and shared back to council members. So all of those questionnaires that all the departments filled in, every single piece of information that came back to council was provided in full to council members. Sometimes with a summary as well, sometimes with some analysis or recommendations from the chairperson. So Debbie had noted that she led the consensus building workshop. She was actually vice chair at the time, and the chairperson was Yvonne Deagle. And so the chairperson has a special role in examining all of the feedback that comes in, filtering it. And so Yvonne was chair at the time and made recommendations to council about what changes might be needed from the draft to incorporate in the final version. So then we also, during that time, we hold a meeting with past chairpersons of the Advisory Council almost every year, and we had a chance to have past chairs from as far back as the 1970s take a look at the draft report card and provide their feedback as well, with that long view of the work being done on gender equality. So that was pretty exciting for the 2018 report card. Some departments or community organizations did suggest changes for grades or did suggest changes for assessments. These suggestions were all considered, again, with a recommendation from the chairperson to the council members about how council might proceed and whether they might incorporate a change to an assessment or not. So the chairperson led consultation with council members about final changes to assessments and to the report, and then the final equality report card came out with a news conference in 2018. It was the document that you see before you, and it was, as you can see, a distillation of information from all government departments, from focus group participants, from community organizations with expertise on specific categories, and most particularly from the government-appointed members of the Advisory Council on the Status of Women, who had final say on all grades and all the content in the report, and who individually and through consensus had sign-off on the report. So it doesn't take a long time looking at the 2018 Equality Report Card to recognize that the majority of issues in the report relate to health and social development, so are particularly relevant to this standing committee. No matter what categories council members use or what labels they apply on the issues, it is consistently the fact that there can be no gender equality without addressing issues of health and social development, in particular poverty, prevention of violence and trauma, attention to social determinants of health. All other categories relate back to health, well-being, income, and their interrelationship. So the goals of the Equality Report Card have remained the same over time, and however we list them, the fundamental goal is to have that gender and diversity analysis considered as part of every government decision that affects the lives of Islanders. Every budget, every program, every service, every policy, every piece of legislation that could have different effects for the lives of Islanders who, depending on their gender or other group identities they carry into the world. It's only through considering gender and diversity effects that we can achieve results that are equitable for all people. And I'm just going to take a moment to reflect on the presentation you just heard from Dawn Allen about the Street Navigator program. And she made a comment that was gender analysis. She said that they have dealt with more men than women on the streets, panhandling on the streets in Charlottetown. And she was concerned that stating that would have be controversial. Well, it is absolutely not controversial to look at the gender effects of policies and the gender effects that lead people into the circumstances that they are in, including being someone who is street involved. So there are a couple of gender factors that would come up immediately in thinking about that. She talked about the difficulty of reaching out for help. As a result of gender roles in our society, men are socialized and not encouraged to ask for help when they need it. There's a lot of pressure within the definitions of masculinity that are held in this society to take care of it yourself. You know, think of being a man, stand up for yourself, take care of it yourself. You're responsible for your income and income for others. And so that's deeply gendered, right? So that's a gender effect that affects men differently. I would cite some research by UPEI professor Janice McClellan-Peters, who has looked at homeless single mothers for another view on some of the gender effects and why we might not see as many women reaching out to those street navigators. Because she's identified, for example, that visibility as a homeless woman with children is not a safe situation. It is not safe to be visible. Panhandling might not be available as an option because of that requirement of visibility. And the reason for that is their fear of that if they ask for help, that their children will be removed from their care, right? So that's a fear that leads to a different gender effect. So knowing that there are more street-involved men reaching out to the Navigator or helped by that Navigator program is a first step. Looking at the effects underlying that gender effect from the perspective of both women and men and other genders is really, really what's at stake. So I just kind of went off script there to kind of make that connection since it's so fresh in your minds. But the fundamental thing in gender and diversity analysis is that it's not enough to give every person the same thing. Different groups have different needs. So as one example goes, it's one thing to give everyone a pair of shoes, and that's perhaps fair in a sense. Everyone gets a pair of shoes, but it's only equity if everyone gets a pair of shoes that fits. Imagine giving out shoes that treat men's shoe size as standard for everyone. If that were the case, not very many women would be able to use the shoes they receive. Giving people shoes that fit begins by understanding that there will be group-based differences as well as individual differences, and that women as a group have smaller feet than men as a group. Determining people's shoe sizes would require extra work and consideration, but would in the end have better results for more people, fewer wasted shoes, and more feet covered. So if the goal of the Equality Report Card is to have more gender and diversity analysis used in decision making, then it is succeeding. Since 2018 was the 10th anniversary of the Equality Report Card project, there was a summary of progress on 10 equality goals over the 10 years covered by report cards, and it's on pages, I probably covered up the page numbers, 30 and 31 in the report with bright colored blocks. And that summary of progress on 10 equality goals over the 10 years covered by the report cards, I think provides very convincing evidence of the effectiveness of tracking these issues through the Equality Report Card and using it as a tool for collaborating with government. The Council is confident in saying there are numerous issues that would not have advanced so much without the impetus for working together and without the public accountability that's offered by the Report Card Project. So I had mentioned that there is a report card coming in 2021. I'm going to let Debbie tell you a little bit more about that.
Okay. The model for the 2021 report card is in development, and Council members are consulting with the government and community, but Council has taken feedback from government very seriously in shaping a new model. You will hear more about the model in the coming months, but the most important feedback Council members acted on has been given to give more consideration and credit to the hard work of maintaining gains on gender equality. So the Council has always set the status quo situation as a D grade. As such, the only way to get a failing grade is to make the status quo for gender equality worse, or to do nothing in the midst of a worsening situation. But as improvements have been made year by year on gender equality in PEI, the status quo has also changed and the bar has raised. The 2021 Equality Report Card will be very transparent in how it awards grades for sustaining equality gains. So, for example, in thinking about health and social development in particular, Council members will be looking for equality gains to be sustained, such as continuation of services provided by the Women's Wellness Programme and the Sexual Health Services for all genders, continuation of student wellbeing teams in schools, continuation of health promotion through the Public Health Office focused on social determinants of health, gender-specific protocols in health PEI substance use treatment programs, affirmation of the Poverty Reduction Action Plan and its principles with acknowledgement of income as the most important social determinant of health, continued support for programs and organisations at least at 2018 levels, including school breakfast and snack programs, violence prevention programs, skills PEI, child care allowances and more. Undiminished support for islanders through programs such as the Accessibility Programme, the rent supplements for islanders in housing need and childcare subsidies and more. Council members know that these gains and others have been hard work to achieve and will require hard work and commitment by government to maintain. And rather than setting out specific priority action areas for government to achieve by 2021, each new equality building initiative by government will be considered on its own merits. That doesn't mean Council won't set high expectations for change and won't have substantive suggestions where they see a need for action. But the renewed model will be more open and flexible and will make the work of reporting and assessing less daunting and burdensome for both government departments and Council members. This change is in the spirit of the fair and collaborative process that has informed the Equality Report Card since its beginnings. The chief benefit of the Equality Report Card project is that I'm trying to read Jane's words, so you have to bear with me, is that when that action takes place, when government makes decisions that advance equity and inclusion, there's a way to capture the change, to offer reward and praise, as well as to hold government accountable for continuing the work to improve gender equality for the benefit of all islanders.
So now we'd be happy to answer questions.
Do our best.
You guys did that in unison, too.
We have rehearsed that on the way in.
Anyway, thanks a lot for that. I'll open it up to the committee members to ask any questions. Mr. Trivers?
Well, thank you for your presentation and for all the hard work that put into creating the Equality Report Card. It's like some members across might say, if you don't measure what you're doing, then you can never improve, right? So we have a B- at the end of 2018. I like to think that there's lots of good initiatives on the go right now that fit into at least some of the categories here. Everything from the first 1,000 days initiative to, a universal pre-K program to a school food initiative. It's great working in this collaborative minority government, and there's lots of credit to go around for all these ideas. So I wanted to know in particular how much you think that improvements to our early years system in terms of, we talked about a universal pre-K, but there's been a lot of talk, a lot of questions about how we get there and the improvements we need to make to our early childhood educators' wages, for example, in order to reach that. So how much of a role will that play in helping with gender equality?
I think that, we look at the over 30 years that there's been effort by women's organizations to get a national child care program in Canada. It's seen here and elsewhere as a fundamental way of supporting gender equality, and improvements, especially those that are grounded in some gender and diversity analysis, are going to result in better results. We can look at what's happened in Quebec, for example, where there has been affordable and accessible childcare for a number of years. The positive effects have not only been for equity, but also for the economy of that province. And that's been very, very well established. Certainly what's come up very frequently in the report card and in the 2018 report card, the highlight was early childhood educator wages as a significant factor in changing things. And as we mentioned, in 2011, the boost in the grade in the report card really was as a result of some transformations that happened in the early childhood sector. The kindergarten being rolled into the provincial public school system was a significant move, and we know that those would have significant effects for women. Could you comment as well?
I think, based on what Jane's saying, there's two aspects. So, early childhood educators, the majority of them are women. So, an increased wage will improve their livelihoods and their lifestyle and what the things they're able to do. But for other women, being able to get their children into reliable, consistent care, that releases them to go back to school, to further their education, in terms of the job market, it frees up their time and what they're able to achieve. So that goes back into the economy, but it also creates better opportunities for everybody and for families.
And the analysis in the report card, I think, would also point to the need for care, early childhood care and education that responds to the needs of the contemporary workforce, including more options in rural communities, more options outside typical 9 to 5 hours. And those were some of the gaps that were being identified. And there was some funding coming online in 2018 to help to mitigate some of those challenges. And it wasn't online, it wasn't online long enough to see the effects in 2018. So we would be looking to see, was there a follow-through on the investments that were brought in through federal provincial partnerships for childcare funding? Was there a rollout into rural communities? Was there an expansion of 24/7 services? Was there an expansion of French language services for early childhood care and education? And is that helping to meet the need? One of the challenges is that the need shifts, right? The need for, whether it's childcare or other like housing, for example, the need shifts as well as the services provided. And so a lot of what council does is assess, okay, we've got this program, we've got this service, we've got this need. What's the match between the need and the service, or the need and the funding, or the need and the program? And that is only possible to get at with information from government, but balanced with information from the community and those focus groups that say, I know that there's a program for this and I can't access it in my location, or I can't access it at 7 o'clock at night in my location, and it's still a challenge for me.
Excellent. Mr. Schurz?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for that. I mean, it's an area, being the ministry responsible for education, lifelong learning, that the early years portion is a big part of the initiative. So glad to hear that it should make a difference on the equality front, and looking forward to any feedback you may have on that as well. Make sure you reach out to the department. And along those lines, on a different topic, the sexual health curriculum within our schools. We've obviously, there's the microphone song that came in, that's part of that, which was just a fantastic initiative. But in the intermediate level, so grades 7 through 9, we've done a curriculum renewal, and we're working on a curriculum renewal on the high school side as well. I know I was in a high school just last week, and the teacher made no bones about showing me the materials and how out of date they are. But I wanted to find out from you if you felt that the PEI Advisory Council on the Status of Women has been reached out to and as involved as you want it to be in that curriculum renewal process, because I feel like you probably have some good information to add to it.
We did get, before Debbie was chairperson, we did get a meeting, or we were invited to take part in a meeting with Mary Beth Rogers-Neal, and to review some materials and to provide input into the curriculum development.
Good. And
Brad?
have you been invited to do anything with the senior sexual health curriculum yet? I think we're at the very beginning stages.
No, we have not. So there was an advisory committee that worked on the curriculum documents that for up to this stage that we were not represented in. There were gender analysis groups or gender interested groups that were involved indirectly in that advisory capacity. We just had a chance to have one-on-one input with Mary Beth, who was coordinating the efforts.
Okay, great.
Heath?
It's actually a great report and great presentation. Actually, coming from government, it's awfully nice to be able to look at this and look at what the successes were, or the failures, or what's still to come. And one thing that kind of still to come is the poverty reduction action plan. I think you said it was going to be in the 2021 report. Is that correct?
So the poverty reduction action plan itself came out before the reporting period for the next report card, which will look at this mandate of government. And so we found other mechanisms as a council for responding to the poverty reduction action plan and supporting its principles when it came out. But it didn't fall into, like the report card's never been designed as a political tool in the sense that it's designed to line up with election dates. The suggested schedule for rolling it out did come from the government that you were part of at the time, and their hope was to have the feedback of the report card before the end of a mandate, so that there would be time to follow up on filling gaps that were still identified, and I think there were some gaps filled. But the Poverty Reduction Action Plan, what is done with it, will be assessed in the 2021 model by council members. But the plan itself pre-existed the current mandate.
Obviously 45 years, I think you said at the beginning. That's a long time, but growing up with 3 older sisters, and I emphasize older, 3 older sisters and having a daughter, this is tremendous work and it's great. One area that seems to be lacking is the mental health side, and is that something that we need more focus on? Or is that related to the poverty reduction too? I'm assuming they'd be related.
You start. I've got your back.
Yeah, okay. I think mental health is related to everything. So we know that with social determinants of health, if you're struggling to make ends meet, then that puts pressure in terms of mental health, and it has outward ripple effects on the whole family and communities. So I think with the new report card, we're looking more at making suggestions rather than making priorities. But I think mental health on PEI is a problem. I think it's widely known that there are a lot of gaps that need to be addressed, that we need that healthcare, people need to be able to access it in a timely fashion. So the lack of that infrastructure is a problem.
And just as within government, council, in trying to create a model for the equality report card, has to balance a lot of different factors, and including mental health within a category of women's health or general health, including it under a category of poverty elimination, is the choice that the councils have made. There've been, since 2008, there's been a variety of different ways that the council has tried to figure out how to put the emphasis on mental health, whether to put mental health and addictions together or to split them up. This is paralleling some of the structural challenges within government, but mental health has been a significant segment of the analysis since 2008. It has never been off the agenda within the report card, and it's been a really significant focus of discussion around the table. Focus groups, again, are another way of making sure that lived experience of mental illness or mental health and well-being are captured, that gets captured in the report. And as noted, it's such a significant part of poverty elimination as well, in the sense that I know that the Special Committee on Poverty and PEI has heard speaker after speaker talk about the link between a basic income guarantee, for example, and mental health benefits in general and mental health benefits in particular. So it is all linked. One of the ways that the council has stated its expectations is in a category statement for each category. So at the beginning of each category, there's a black box that has some motherhood statements, you could call them, if that's not too gendered a term, that really says here's what council members expect of government, and social determinants of health, mental health are prominent among those.
Okay. Thank you. That's fine, Chair.
Thank you. Hannah?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I want to just note that the grade of B3 was an almost not, B minus was almost not. It's like a 70.3, and at 69, it would have been a C minus. So there's a really narrow space there, but hopeful that at least sort of maintaining, and then there have been some significant changes and improvements that, hopefully we won't be going backwards. I understand, though, having looked at previous report cards, that, you know, the categories or the things that you focus on in different report cards will also shift and change. And so, you know, how do you decide sort of what the primary things are that you're going to kind of include in that edition? I think we've heard a bit about your process, but, you know, in the short version of how does that kind of piece of what gets included?
It really does come down to the council members.
Okay.
So we represent the women on the island, and that's how we're selected, or to what we're selected to represent. So it's our voice. So, for example, at the moment on council, we have myself as a minority representation. So that, considering that aspect, we have somebody who may have the poverty aspect, and we have a nurse who will speak to the health aspect. So all those voices come together, and we will look at the framework we have and kind of look at the categories that we have and are they still relevant, and then just look at the wording. So that's why we've gone from making priorities to making suggestions and wanting to see just different things sustained. But down to the wording, it's all through collaboration and consultation with council members. So we're even tweaking words because it doesn't quite convey the meaning. So it really is a member-driven process.
Yeah, so for example, for the 2021 report, the council did make a few adjustments to categories. Those category adjustments were to rename the women's economic status category as poverty elimination, and to really focus on poverty elimination within that category. Another change was after, I think it was just in 2013, 2015 that a gap in the report card had been identified for adult education and training, and so a category was added for adult education and training. That doesn't capture what the current council wants to assess either, and so that category has been expanded to be more workforce development. So for instance, where under women's economic status in 2018, minimum wage might have been one of the factors that was examined, workforce development might encompass minimum wage, and then the poverty elimination category can look at kind of wider trends in poverty elimination. So there have been some adjustments, and as Debbie said, during the onset of Hurricane Dorian, on the morning of September 7th, I think it was, the council members had to meet by teleconference. For those who could get there in person were there in person. We were supposed to be at Lennox Island and enjoying a beautiful day with the Aboriginal Women's Association. It wasn't a day for driving to Lennox Island. So by teleconference, they spent several hours workshopping word by word category statements that will be shared as we continue that iterative process of sharing the information about the 2021 model.
Hannah?
Sorry, just to follow up, just more of a statement, but I think for policy, from a policy perspective, having the piece that you've done around the 10 years, it's a really good reminder of how long we've been talking about the same thing without it moving. I'm looking at a few of these going, oh dear, you know, that's a good reminder that you know, we're not the first ones to be talking about these, but also how long those things have been talked about with no movement, and how important some of these bigger issues like public transit, how critical that is to impacting, you know, the outcomes in this report card. And I think that's really good for people that don't work in a space where they are thinking about a gender lens, or even if we do, and it's easy to forget. So that I find, you know, I've always loved the report cards, but I find that piece, you know, particularly powerful for policy and for policy focus. So I just really wanted to let you know how much I appreciate that aspect of the report card and the value it brings for us. So thank you for the work you do.
Yeah, and you know, speaking of public transit, it's an example where there hasn't been a lot of movement. In some of those boxes, you will see that small and incremental changes make a big difference.
Yeah.
So if you look, for example, at, you know, the application of gender and diversity analysis and having it applied across government, the steps are small, but every couple of years there was something else happening. Beginning with the minister responsible for status of women putting forward a motion to set up a committee on best practices in gender-based analysis in 2008. Within a few years, Prince Edward Island was really leading the nation and leading the provinces in its redevelopment and reapplication of gender and diversity analysis across government. And that has effects, right? The more that analysis gets used, the more that we look, what are going to be the effects, what are going to be the actual outcomes of policy on people's lived experience in the community? Is that going to be different for women living in rural PEI compared to a man living in Charlottetown? The more we do that analysis, the more the results of the policy are going to have positive effects or have the intended effects. It's worth investing that extra time and energy to say, wait a minute, is there a gender difference here? Is there a diversity and inclusion goal that needs to be integrated into this policy for it to have the effects that we want it to have?
Trish?
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to echo the comments from my colleague here about this report and just add that it's an incredibly robust report, tackling some very complex issues, yet it's presented in such an accessible way with actionable items. And as someone coming from a research background, I know that's not easy to do, and I think it's really remarkable what you've been able to accomplish here. I'm curious about the methodology for the focus group. So one of the things I appreciate about this report is that you've included that qualitative component where you're hearing from the actual voice of women, and individuals who have contributed to this report and their stories and their lens. I see there were 3 focus groups, very targeted. So I'm wondering if you could tell me a bit about how that methodology was developed, and if that's something you expect might expand or change at all in the next report.
So the first time that there was an equality report card focus group was 2011, and it was one focus group that was built around an opportunity and that was undertaken with an interest-based facilitated process. The reason that the focus group was incorporated was that one of the pieces of feedback that we consistently received in 2008 and 2009 is that when council members' experiences or the experiences of people who called or communicated with the advisory council were reflected in the 2008 and 2009 report cards, we would, it might be introduced with a statement like, we have heard from women in the community that they are experiencing something. And the feedback was constantly, that's just one person, That may not be valid. That's one person's experience. We're talking about a whole program here. That experience, that qualitative experience was being dismissed because of the way it was being presented. So in 2011, we did that first experiment, and then we realized this is a necessary method of getting lived experience into the report card in a way that it can be framed. It can be framed as really a fundamental part of the picture. It still is open to the criticism. Well, that's just the experience of one person. But we've got a framework around it. It was also a way of reaching lived experiences of people who might be underrepresented in the report card. So the selection of focus groups was different for every report card that we've done one. I think we've done 3 for 2013, 2015, and 2018 for each of those years. And it responded to what opportunities existed to bring a group of people together, what needs were in the community, and what groups may be underrepresented. So there have been in the course of the project a couple of focus groups in French. There have been a couple of focus groups with people with disabilities, with newcomers to Canada, with Indigenous women, and the focus groups are open to all genders, or some of them have included people of all genders, not just women. So it's another way of reaching out. So that's a little bit of the history of it. What would you add as the value of hearing from those focus groups and the commitment going forward?
I attended one the one on Lennox Island, before the report card was published. And so it gives an opportunity to gather the people from that community to feel like they're having a voice. And it certainly was emotional at times because people feel disempowered and they don't have a voice. So to be able to bring them there, give them that opportunity and then say, yes, we are going to incorporate this. So there were difficult conversations, but, note-taking, and we recorded some of those and tried to capture the essence of what was being said and then tried to make sure we conveyed that in the report card. And that would have gone back before the report, in the draft, they would have seen those, it would have gone back to the community before the draft, it was formalised. So just really trying to ensure that we are speaking for women, or for people, right, in the community.
And that they see themselves reflected, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the methodology has really been a fairly open-ended conversation with the members of the participants in the focus group, facilitated by council staff and council members, and with the exact words of the participants recorded, confidentiality agreements in advance, so information is anonymized for obvious reasons, and then shared back in, verbatim, like in the words of the people who spoke with the council members and staff.
Thank you. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else? The next, I just have a couple. The next 10 years, the strategy has been to repopulate Prince Edward Island with immigration routes and bringing people in from different countries and stuff. Could you just talk a little bit about, I know I see diversity on here a little bit, but how that's going to change in the next 10 years and what we have to do now to get ready to support newcomers?
When I look around as an immigrant, I see and I hear, just from being in that community, that a lot of immigrants come to PEI and they don't stay, they tend to move on. And some of those can be through challenges in securing work and employment, but also just feeling that sense of community when they arrive here. And I know that the government, we have annual celebrations, we do different things for inclusion, but it needs to go beyond that. So we need to see our faces, as I say, this is an immigrant as a minority, reflected in and at all the tables that govern our communities. So to see that happening, to see infrastructure, to see supports, community supports, individual supports, and culture incorporated would go some way into keeping people here. PEI has an ageing population, so the reality is that we need immigrants. And I was hearing recently there's $45 million coming through the international students through UPI and 600 jobs. So there in itself is reasons of why we need to attract people and why we need to keep them. So I don't quite know if I'm asking. In terms of looking at infrastructure and making sure that we have those things, that we're being proactive rather than reactive, that we're not having immigrants come and there's nothing here for them. And I know there have been challenges with trying to get them to move further out of Charlottetown, but then there isn't the infrastructure in terms of transport, and a lot of people they may not have money, they don't have access to buy a vehicle, they can't drive, so then they're stuck in the middle of nowhere, so they come to Charlottetown. So we need to look at the whole picture in terms of, if we're getting people here, what are we doing to help them be successful and to settle here? And gender equality comes into that as well.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said.
And participating in democratic processes, such as speaking to standing committees, speaking to different groups. The way that we do diversity and inclusion in the processes that lead to decision-making and in decision-making is going to affect those decisions, right? So if there isn't a sign language interpreter, you may not hear from someone who's deaf. If there isn't transportation support provided to a community consultation, there might be people who are not able to get there. If there isn't wheelchair accessibility in the space that's been chosen for a community consultation, then you're not going to hear the voices of people who use wheelchairs. And if all the consultations are all at the same time of day, you're going to be missing some people who have to be in work can't absent themselves to participate. And in the evenings, you're going to be missing other people who can't leave their children and families or the elders that they're caring for to be able to participate. So thinking about ways that diversity and inclusion can be put into action, put into force, those are the steps that, that go beyond just saying this is open to everyone. Sometimes it's going to require that there be a specific invitation. Sometimes it's going to require that that there be a specific support in place for people to be able to participate fully and completely.
Yeah, and I don't think it's ever going to be a one-size-fits-all, because we have to look at where our populations are coming from. And so we may have refugees and we may have immigrants, and they have very different needs. So we're not just serving an immigrant population, we need to look at where they've come from, what are they bringing with them, and how do we address those issues to give them a chance of being successful.
That's great. Amazing answers. And just the last question, you heard me ask the group before. Again, we're getting ready to present to the Legislative Assembly. Just to give you the last shot, one or two things to add that we could add to our report that you would like to see at the top of that report.
So I'll start by just saying that we are really looking forward to collaborating with the current government, that we would ask that there be encouragement and support to maintain that 100% full participation by every government department in every request of the Advisory Council to provide information for the report card. We'd love to keep that streak going. We know it requires some work. The Council has done a lot of work to make that work more manageable with the changes that they've made to the model. So that would be the top request from me as the person who has to collect all that information. But also, the goal is always to collaborate with government for the highest grades possible on the equality report card. It is meant to be an opportunity to reward as well as hold to account. So we want to work with government in all its phases to help to achieve high grades. And that might mean reaching out on specific questions like Minister Trivers did at the beginning, like is the Advisory Council providing advice on this specific issue, on sexual health curriculum or on early childhood care and education? The members that government has appointed have that legislative mandate to provide advice. That they've been selected and brought together specifically to provide advice to government and educate the public. So as a member, what would you like to see?
Well, I think for my part, I think understanding that change and real change comes from having difficult conversations and being open to have those conversations, and just hearing what the community is bringing to you and being prepared to hear that and act on it. So really just to keep having the conversations, I think.
Excellent. Well, Debbie and Jane, thank you for coming in, and you did a wonderful job today. I think the committee, is everybody okay? Anything else? Good. Okay, and we just want to thank you on coming in, and we'll see about making sure we do you justice when we're presenting. Thank you very much. And so at this time, because we did all of our other business, we can, I just need a motion to adjourn the meeting. Hannah Bell, meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.